Hello, and welcome to our writing project, Comparing and Contrasting Different Versions of Cinderella. Today, we're going to complete Lesson 4, Developing a Thesis Statement. Today, you will identify the elements of a thesis statement, you will draft a complete thesis statement, and you will revise a thesis statement. I want you to go ahead and open up the Compare and Contrast Thesis document that is found in this lesson. Let's look at our prompt. Choose two versions of the Cinderella story you have read. Then write a compare and contrast essay that answers the following question. Which version is a better example of a fairy tale, and why? You may choose the original, in other words, the 1600s version that we first looked at, and Rhodopus, or you could choose one of the other versions found in the Lesson 2A folder. The prompt asks you to compare and contrast the two versions of Cinderella you choose, but it also asks you to make a judgment about the text. It asks you to decide which one is a better example of a fairy tale. What elements make up a good fairy tale? Once you have decided which two texts to write about, which one of these two texts is the better fairy tale and why, you will have everything you need to put together your thesis statement and to plan your essay. I'm going to give you a few minutes to choose two of the Cinderella stories that we've read or that you have access to. I want you to choose stories you've enjoyed since it's easier to write about topics that you like. When you've chosen your stories, I want you to write the titles in the first bullet under First Thoughts. Now you have to decide which of the two is better. You will need to identify the message or theme of both, the good versus the evil elements, the dramatic transformations that happen, the magical elements, and anything else that's an element of a good fairy tale. Once you have chosen your text, you need to complete 1, the prompt on the handout, the Compare and Contrast Thesis Statement handout, to determine which is the better fairy tale and why. Again, this is going to provide everything you need for your thesis statement. Remember, these are just your first thoughts. You will work with these thoughts to craft a thesis statement, but your thesis statement may change in later stages of the writing process as you plan, draft, and even revise your essay. Writing is a lot like testing a theory. As you play with ideas and gather information, your theory or thesis statement can evolve. I want you to go ahead and spend the next several minutes finding similarities and differences between your two chosen selections. Now it's time to talk about thesis statements. Where in a text does a thesis statement appear? What does a thesis statement express? Now I want you to open the document labeled Analyze Thesis Statements. Let's look at the thesis statement checklist. A strong thesis statement directly answers and addresses all parts of the writing prompt. It makes a claim that could possibly be disputed. It gives a sneak preview of how the information will be arranged in the body of the text, and it appears in the first paragraph. Not all thesis statements are created equal. Some are stronger and weaker than others. The thesis statement must directly answer the writing prompt. Remember that a strong thesis statement has some basic characteristics. It directly answers the writing prompt. In the case of the prompt at the top of the page, a strong thesis would directly answer two questions. Which of the two stories is the better fairy tale, and why? When you answer a why question, how do you begin? What's the first word? What word answers why? So a good thesis statement in response to this prompt will go something like, so-and-so is the better fairy tale because it blah, blah, blah. A strong thesis statement appears in the first paragraph. It is clear and understandable. It doesn't leave the reader guessing or searching for the writer's central idea. It stands out. It should also hint at how the information will be arranged in the body of the text. If it names three differences, the reader can guess the information will be arranged in a point-by-point format. If it states a general idea about one story and then a general idea about the other story, the reader can guess the information will be arranged in block format. It makes a claim that could possibly be disputed. In a sense, it expresses the author's opinion. Now let's look at the sample thesis statements. All of these thesis statements were written in response to the prompt at the top of the page of the previous handout. So we're going to evaluate the strength of the first thesis statement. Let's look at our instructions. We're going to read each thesis statement. We're going to use the checklist to decide whether each one is strong or weak. We're going to write in the space provided whether each is strong or weak and then tell what makes it so. Number 1 says, this paper will compare and contrast the story Cinderella and the poem Cinderella Sonnet. One strength of this thesis statement is that it clearly states that the essay will compare and contrast two things. Cinderella and Cinderella Sonnet. So this is a good statement of the paper's topic, but it isn't a strong thesis statement. Let's look at the criteria to see why. It fails to answer the main question posed in the prompt, which version is a better example of a fairy tale and why. It gives a sneak preview of how it does not give a sneak preview of how the information will be arranged. The reader isn't given any indication whether the text will be organized in block format or point-by-point format. And it doesn't make a claim that can possibly be disputed. So I want you to go ahead and answer that first item. Now let's look at number 2. Cinderella and Rhodopes are similar in some ways, but different in others. I want you to consult the prompt and the criteria before deciding whether the thesis statement answers all parts of the question. Some thesis statements may be neither strong nor weak, but somewhere in between. Remember to record your evaluations on the page. Number 3 says, Cinderella Sonnet is the best example of a fairy tale. So go ahead and complete the remaining items. Now that you know the difference between a strong and a weak thesis statement, you can write your own. Use what you wrote under first thoughts to draft 2 different versions of your thesis statement, one for each format. One for block format and one for point-by-point format. Remember to refer to the strong thesis statements written on the page that we just completed. You may model your thesis statement on the 2 thesis statements that were strong. Thesis statements consist of complete sentences and sometimes more than one sentence, so it answers a different question. Each sentence answers a different question in the prompt. Be sure to keep in mind the 2 compare and contrast formats, block and point by point. Now I want you to look and see which thesis statement you consider stronger and why. You're going to write that thesis statement in Nearpod. Remember, this is just a draft of your thesis statement. You can revise it later on when you are drafting or revising your essay if you want to. Having a thesis statement in hand is like having a roadmap in hand or a GPS. If it's a strong thesis statement, it will tell you where to go and how to get there.